Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust architectures, and we're specifically talking about priorities. And I'm going to throw it over to you, Jeff, to talk about top priorities with Veeam.
Absolutely. So I've mentioned a resiliency of data protection, resiliency of backups a couple of times already. So I won't focus on that. Frankly, that is and has been one of our top priorities when we speak with agencies and commands that we work with in the federal government, just because it's absolutely necessary. But I want to riff off a couple of things that Akiba and Scott said earlier. Scott mentioned that CBP is going to be bringing on board a chief data officer, and that one of the big challenges around zero trust is actually knowing what data you have and making sure that you actually are aware of what the resources are and what the vulnerabilities are. One of Veeam Government Solutions priorities with our customers is letting them leverage backups sort of at a technical level for doing some of that data classification to sort of offload the burden from the production network. And so we're continuing sort of technically to invest in ways that folks can actually find out what their data estate looks like, where they've got PII, where they've got information that might need a higher level of securing. So that's our second priority after super resiliency for backups, things like air gapping and immutability. And the third, I'll just point to something that Akiba said. We continually find that alignment between the mission leadership and financial leadership in an agency and technical and security leadership is not what it could be. In the backup and data recovery space, we've seen this for years when we've tried to do with private sector and public sector customers, the business impact analysis. What do I need to get running after a disaster when? What really matters to the mission? But we see a lack of alignment as well on the security side, and actually put some data behind that. In the most recent data protection trend survey that we did, we asked IT and security leadership, and then we asked business leadership how well the mission was aligned, if there needed to be a significant overhaul, total overhaul, or everything was fine. And 52% said that there needed to be either a significant or a total overhaul in the way that their organizations were aligned to get secure around what they were doing with their data. So when I hear that, I know that we've got some educating to do, and we're spending a lot of time talking with organizations about that.
Wow, interesting statistics there, Bo.
Yeah,
priorities for you at the Census Bureau.
There's a sense of urgency at Census, and the reason for that is we only have a few years here up until the middle of the decade before the 2030 census takes over and the entire agency pivots toward that priority. And that's always a national priority. So that's the right pivot when that happens. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, we really got to work hard to reinvent ourselves before that happens, before that pivot occurs. And so what we're doing is trying to consolidate IT. Like many organizations, we're trying to consolidate our IT. We have a portfolio of information collection instruments, as you can imagine, and then dissemination instruments. And so, we collect data, we process data, and then we distribute data. That's really what we do at the Census Bureau. Mm-hmm. In the back end, we have a data lake. And so that's where we're really focusing, like Jeff said, and Scott said, we're really focusing on that data as the most valuable asset at the Census Bureau. And of course, maintaining the public's trust in us is always a top priority for us at the Census Bureau. So we know we have to get this right in this age of privacy consciousness that we're experiencing as a society, right? So we're working hard to really make sure that this data lake is as robust as we've talked about here today, that we do have the zero trust principles and policies ahead of that. We just had a demo earlier this week where we were showing staff zero trust capabilities of one of our collection instruments. And one of the aha moments that the audience had was when the team demonstrated that even with an admin account, you were subject to that policy, right? That zero trust policy. Even an admin could not circumvent that policy. So what that did was show people that we've got RBAC, role-based access control, and RBAC will be here for a while, but Zero Trust uses a different model. It's an attribute-based access control approach. And so we're seeing a merge of those two now. You can have your role as an admin, but you're still subject to that policy and those specific attributes identified in that policy to restrict it. And that's why it's so powerful and so flexible, right? Combining those things together. So I think over time, we'll see ABAC sort of fill more of the space. And so RBAC is less and less relevant. And so that's what we're prioritizing now.
Sure. And an interesting nuance there. And I would imagine that with this tectonic shift in technology, 50 years ago, you did the census activity the same way every 10 years. Now, I would imagine each 10 years, there's such a shift in technology that there's a lot of redressing doing as far as how one would approach that. So interesting concept there. Chris, how about a Quest software, top priority?
Our top priority, quite frankly, is moving our customers, our agencies, from a siloed approach to security and trust to a unified strategy or deployment. And what I mean by that is, just as you were just talking about hiring and bringing on chief data officers, quite frankly, to figure out exactly what data is in an organization. That is a very large silo within every organization. So if you think about it, we have users with their own set of permissions and priorities and objectives. You have nodes that they use or devices, small, central edge devices. And then you have the data, and then you have applications. And today, each one of those represents a different siloed organization. And we can go even more granular than that. So there's access management in each one of those. Sometimes we do privilege management or privilege sessions in each one of those, for instance. So, and then you have to do governance. And if all those things are siloed, that is, if you have one governance and access and authorization mechanism for your data and a separate one for your users, and yet another one for applications to get access to a firewall, for instance, or to move across segments in the network, then that type of siloed architecture makes it almost near to impossible to really do zero trust the way it's been envisioned. So our goal as an organization really is to move our customers from a siloed approach to a more unified approach, where it is more about the policy around you, not just as Bo was saying around RBAC, it is now really around policy. Who are you? Where are you in the organization? What do you do, for instance? And then also think about identity attributes that make us unique, for instance. So I love my iPhone. I also have an Android phone, but iPhone gives me really good facial recognition, for instance. So it doesn't remove the password. It obfuscates the password, for instance, with another identity mechanism. Same thing with biometrics. But you can only do those things once you unify those silos within an organization and bring all that credentialing, so to speak, all that authorization activity into a central model, for instance, so you can actually literally now look down at your kingdom, so to speak, and try to understand exactly where data is flowing, where applications are moving and how applications are moving data, and how users are executing on a mission, for instance. But you can only get there once you have a unified strategy where identity is central to that and critical to that, and actually make the mission work for all your organizations internally.
Unified strategy, very, very important here. Well, we're going to wrap it up with our last question. But before we do, I can't resist, Bo, top lesson learned for you.
It's really about communication and education for staff. Even our senior level network experts and developers, they struggled with these concepts. So I can't overstate enough the necessity to really talk. We had some spirited debates at the Census Bureau with senior level folks, and we really had to kind of work through that to get to an understanding, and we're getting there. We're still got some loose ends to kind of clean up, but I think generally folks are now understanding the concepts of zero trust and really how powerful and flexible it is for us versus something called zero trust that seems very rigid on the surface. It's not. It's extremely flexible, but very sophisticated in that flexibility. So that's what I would say.
Scott, you all have been on a journey there, early adopters. Top lesson learned that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, we were pretty fortunate we had started early. So that's one of the things, if folks have not started, which in the federal space, I would be surprised. But start if you haven't already. And then the next thing would be do a gap analysis. Figure out what you already have in place so that you understand what needs to be put in place as soon as possible, and then start justifying for additional resources. Top level senior CBP has been supportive of cybersecurity the entire time that I've been with the 2+ years that I've been with CBP. Had nothing but support for cybersecurity. Of course, zero trust is more than just cyber. But that's the high priority that I would say. Start early and then get that gap analysis done, then start working towards those projects.
Got it. Akiva, let's talk about 2 to 3 years from now. You were at the, you're doing a lot of this analysis. You've done these various reports, et cetera. Paint a picture for 2 to 3 years from now. What's it going to look like?
Sure. I'm going to go a little further for you too, Luke. I think certainly over the next couple of years, I think, everything we've actually already talked about today needs to continue to be done. It's not done. It's all still part of what's going to continue to transpire over the next 2 to 3 years. The execution on the prioritization of the gap analysis, the education, the alignment on the mission side, all of those things going to continue. I see a lot on automation. So I think there is a lot of focus on how do you automate a lot of things across on the data side and data security, data discovery, data classification, everything across all of the technology pillars to remove more and more of the manual out of the process. So I see a big focus on that. I would be remiss if I did not talk further than that and talk a little bit about quantum. Being here from IBM. One of the things that happened over the summer is NIST and the working group actually chose a set of standards for cryptography, quantum safe cryptography protocols that will begin to be implemented. And I'm starting to hear dates of 2027, 2030, where we'll start to see there's generally an assumption of, the levels of password protections and algorithms that we have in place today will begin to break, and that we are going to move towards these types of more highly sophisticated cryptography and algorithms. We welcomed President Biden on October 6th to our quantum computing biggest data center in Poughkeepsie to talk about this topic and its evolution. And I think we are even at the very beginning, even as much as we've been very heavy in the research side, we are just beginning to have the conversations about how that gets commercialized into technologies and into consulting, capabilities. And it's become a real topic in the federal space. It is probably the most requested topic I am getting lately because people are trying to understand what it's about and how it applies, even though the reality of its implementation is quite far down the road. So that's definitely looking further into the crystal ball, but a lot of meetings happening on that topic right now.
And we love the focus on that as well. Chris, how about over at Quest? What's it look like in a couple of years?
It's like I got chills. So I was listening to Akiva about quantum in the future. And I had a personal experience this week. I was trying to get access to personal data that for a company and account I had long forgotten. And they gave me two options. One, I could try to verify and provide some basic information, and they would mail me a letter to my last address known to them with a code that I would then basically enter in the system. Basically, snail mail, two-factor authentication. I was like, there's no way I'm doing this. The other option was to try to identify in real time based on information that they had on me. And I was like, okay, let's try this out. And they said, quote, we're going to use LexisNexis systems. And I was like, okay, that's a good hint. So of course, what they had done was they had crawled credit reports and public information files about data about me, people I knew, my family. And it was fascinating to know what they knew about me. Chilling, but fascinating. Okay. So the nerd in me kept going, like, well, what if I answer this? What I like? So there's uniqueness about us that is in the public sphere, public domain that we have no control over. And so when Akiva was talking about quantum and our cryptographic systems start to break, what do we do, quite frankly? And what I've heard scientists and leading thought leaders around this topic start to come to is that the most unique thing we still have as creatures of living beings is our DNA. And I know no one wants to think about it, but at some point, we're going to have something so unique that even a machine cannot impersonate it. And that's where we're at right now. A machine can find out everything about me right now that's in the public sphere and impersonate me and pretty much do anything. But my DNA, that literal fluid and whatever I'm made out of, quite frankly, or the dust, as Neil deGrasse Tyson would say, is the most unique thing about us as individuals. So I know it's not happening today. I'm still comfortable with a directory service. I'm comfortable with multi-factor authentication, my Face ID. I'm comfortable with that right now. But But I think in the next decade, quite frankly, we're going to get to a point where we're going to need stronger authentication mechanisms and a stronger way to identify and prove literally who we are, because every sci-fi movie is pointing to this. And I'm not going to go there, total nerd, but that's the thing that concerns me. But the future is coming. And for us as an identity focused company, you're right. We're going to have to start figuring out exactly how do we deal with not just quantum, but machine learning. When people turn on right now, they're usually the ransomware is not just ransomware. It often uses cryptographic engines, basically, and they'll have peer-to-peer networking to push those botnets and push processing across the globe to crack networks and crack credentials. So it's getting more and more challenging. At some point, we're going to have to get to the point where, you know what, the only way to prove who you are basically is, can I see your DNA, sir? And that is the future, I'm afraid of.
Ladies and gentlemen, they can't take away our DNA. All right, Jeff, how about Adveem? Tell us about what it's going to look like 2 to 3 years from now. And please don't try to top those last two.
I wouldn't dream of it. I'm not trying to go for DNA authentication. I think Chris hit the ball out of the park with that. Security conversations tend to be gloomy by their nature. We talk about exploits. We talk about how organizations have been victimized. So let me offer a counter to the usual gloom of this kind of conversation. I think in 2 or 3 years now, around data resiliency, around security for data protection, agencies across the government, commands across the U.S. military are going to be on a much, much more resilient footing than they are right now. The technical tools to make sure that data stays safe, even if the worst happens and an attack is detonated, are already there, and they will continue to evolve from all the players in this space on the technical level. So let's talk about a success story. At the RSA conference back in June, there was a fascinating panel discussion about the Russian attack on Ukraine. And in the hours before the actual attack back in February happened, there was a malware cyber attack versus the Viasat network that Ukraine depends on very heavily for both civilian and for military communications. The interesting thing about this, and I actually read about the conversation in the Register, was that the headline was that Ukraine's secret cyber weapon was resilient backups. They're so used to being attacked that they have protected their backups in such a way that an attack designed to wipe out their command and control infrastructure was just okay, another attack, let's restore from backups and we're back up and running. And I am actually optimistic that we're going to see resiliency of that sort across the federal government and across our, the governments of our allies take big, big steps forward. I think we're on the right path in that respect, and that the tools will continue to evolve and help us get more resilient.
Resiliency being a really key part of that. The Londoners taught us that years ago during the bombings, right? I mean, they just,
right,
pick themselves up and keep on going. Bo, what's it going to look like in a couple of years? You'll be right in the thick of preparing for the next census. What can we expect to see 2 to 3 years from now?
I'm impressed with industry's speed and resilience, as Jeff just indicated. And I think now federal agencies realize just how mature cloud services are, for example, and how protected they are, necessarily so, right? Because these companies would not be in business otherwise. So they're really getting it right. And so I do see a trend of continuing to go to cloud services and really going up that stack of technology, not treating the cloud like a data center, because that's the most expensive version of cloud that you can imagine, but really going up that cloud and using platform and software as a service to the greatest extent possible. And so I think that trend is going to make it much easier on federal agencies to manage IT in a way that maximizes the business, right? At Census, we're in the data business. We're not in the IT business. And so the more we can focus on our core mission, I think the better. And I think these trends of technology moving to the cloud and really maximizing service providers and the cloud will continue.
Very good catch on that cloud, not just becoming the next data center. Scott, if I'm a freshly minted Border Patrol agent coming out of the academy, they hand me a gun, they hand me a badge, and what are they going to hand me, an iPad and say, go get them? How's this what can we expect to see 2 to 3 years from now?
Well, we are working on some of those technologies where we're going to lessen the burden on our Border Patrol agents and other field operations folks, Air Marine, Port support folks. One of the things that I will say is zero trust can become a buzzword. I look at zero trust as a lot of it's technology modernization. And so we have legacy applications, we have legacy technology. And in the next couple of years, that's one of the things that I hope we're focusing on. I know we are in some cases with our application modernization, whether it's going to the cloud, shifting things, basically getting it so they can use SAML or multi-factor authentication technology. But over the next couple of years, we also need to look at the operational technology. You mentioned a Border Patrol agent.
Right.
We have sensors, we have body cameras, we have radios, we have airframes, boats. Just about anything can connect to a network, whether it's CBP's network or just the internet. Having an understanding of what that operational technology is, we don't want to leave that out. If we do, we risk vulnerability and then potential breach. I know we had talked about assumed breach, but that's an area of focus over the next couple of years that we're going to be touching on within CBP. So make sure that we don't leave ourselves blind to that whole, as a large scope of technology. We don't want to leave that out either.
No question, tens of thousands of IoT devices out there. Well, listen, I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us on this program and fighting the good fight every single day to keep this country safe. I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make this program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience, that tune in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.